and welcome to this next episode from the RICS Tech Partner Program here at RICS. My name is Andrew Knight. I've been with RICS for nearly 11 years now, and I sit within the standards, thought leadership and regulatory part of the organisation. And my role is to look at the whole effect of data and technology right across the built and natural environment and what that means for our profession and for the stakeholders who use our members and member firms. And I lead the RICS Tech Partner Program, and really happy today to have James and Karl here from Mobiess to discuss what their platform does and really focus on the whole area of software as a service. So James, Karl, welcome this afternoon. Welcome to the call.
Yeah, good afternoon. Hello, Andrew.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Pleasure. Well, I always like to start these calls because despite the fact that we're talking about data and technology, if anything, I find the kind of people side even more interesting. So what I'm going to really ask you first is really a bit of a kind of an introduction to both of you, the backstory, why you set up Mobiess, and really give us an idea of your kind of skills, experience, and ultimately why you set up the firm.
Yeah, certainly. I originally I started out life as a land and engineering surveyor, so working on the building site, setting out piling rigs, etc. And after a few years doing that, I kind of got into the CAD side and started to get into technology. I ended up at a CAFM company developing software for 19 years. So I'd put 3 CAFM solutions onto the market, you know, assets, plan maintenance, and that was starting back in 1991. So 19 years later, I suppose towards the back end of the late 2008, 2007, it was starting to become very samey, and I was doing lots of work with integrating existing mobile applications out there. Some of those guys are still around now. I was the technical director, but I never really found a mobile solution that kind of did what I thought it should do. There was always kind of bits missing and never quite good enough quality. So it was literally one of those mad moments in 2009 where I thought I could do this better. And I 19 years with one company was a bit of a big decision. It was a life-changing decision. And me and one of the senior developers set up Mobiess. So between us, we were the founding members for Mobiess. So the company really sort of stood up on its first legs in 2010. These are the days when Apple were kind of there and thereabouts, and we were dismissing them. We should have taken note a bit earlier, but we weren't. And it was all the other devices. Remember the ones like the Cyan? If you drop it on your foot, it'll break your ankle. So that was our kind of first foray into mobile. So those early years were very much about working in the domain we knew, which was service management. So it was very much about sort of work order management, you know, engineers logging calls, expenses and timesheets on mobile phones, and some of the old Motorola kit. So they were our early years, really. So those are the reasons why. We're still owned by the same people. We've got an extra member on the ownership, but apart from that, most of the people who work with us are from an FM background. And I suppose we've true to our origins. Our background is really FM, and all of the products we've developed have stayed in FM, really. A few little excursions outside, some successful, some not, but generally it's all FM related products that support the services within the buildings. So
thanks, Karl. What about you James? What's your backstory?
Oh, well, maybe slightly less conventional than Karl's route. I think I've always been strong around software and always keen on getting into the software field. I spent a few years, probably 3 or 4 years, initially as a developer myself, and eventually sort of took that into getting involved into CAD and design, and then that sort of branched out from there into more of a sort of sales and commercial role. I got involved in some projects at a couple of firms that I worked with. One was a utility billing company, provided a system for that. Eventually moved into what's known as the auto ID field, so kind of data capture around technologies like barcoding and RFID and solutions in that industry, so things like inventory and stock management and asset management, and just a lot of things to do with business efficiency. And I was had a role there for about 10 years. I sort of ended up becoming sort of the head of sales, which is a role I brought to Mobiess as well. Been here for coming on 5 years, so I think we were just checking between the two of us. We weren't quite sure either. It's been that kind of time period. So it's been about 5 years working closely with Karl and Mobiess as well now. So it's been good. Trying to have fun doing it as well. So it's been good.
Well, I suppose that's a good indication of time flies when you're having fun, if you had to check like that. So.
There has been 2 years of COVID in the middle, though.
Sorry, Karl.
There has been 2 years of COVID in the middle, though.
Yeah, well, I suppose yes. So yeah, but which yes, is I think we've all found that kind of hard to keep track of time. It's sort of distorted time in some ways, isn't it, in terms of sort of keeping
Yeah,
track of
very
the
much.
month and the year. Well, that's great. It's always great to hear that background and say to sort of bring it alive. And the next thing I wanted to pick up was this whole kind of subject of software as a service, because I know your solution is delivered in that way. And I'm sure you both know better than I do that the whole kind of software industry can be slightly sort of overfull of jargon. And thinking particularly of so many of our members who don't particularly want to get into the weeds of jargon and what it means, I'd be really interested to hear what your definition of software as a service is, and what the benefits are of that, and really just sort of unpack that jargon into real layperson's terms, if that's all right.
It's interesting. If I take you back to perhaps my time before I started Mobiess, just as I was kind of starting Mobiess, the industry, the world was really just perpetual licensing. So it was classic licensing. You bought a piece of software, you installed it on your own servers, and you ran it for 5 years. You depreciated over your books, and you paid huge chunks of cut cash out early, and every year you paid 20% maintenance. So that's the way the world was. So software as a service, and really is about leasing. It's about pay as you go. It's about on demand. Great words, but what do they really mean?
Yeah.
And I am still quite concerned about our industry that we work in, because there's still a kind of some odd scenarios where people call themselves SaaS, but they're not really pay as you go. So Mobiess are really a pay as you go. When we set Mobiess up, it was monthly contracts. So no long-term contracts. You don't have to sign a 5-year contract. So the core construct for us was, we have to keep you happy. You'll pay every month with us if we keep you happy. So from our point of view, we believe we're true to values of software as a service. So you sign up, you pay monthly, you have to give 1 month's notice before you leave us. So it's a very scalable solution. So if it's a short-term project, great. So from our point of view, it's a really simple model. It gets difficult when you start to talk to companies who want large numbers of units for their own projects are long term. So if someone's taken out a PFI, for example, or they've just won a new M&E contract and they want 100 service engineers, so they've already got a commitment to 5 years plus one, and we're only monthly. So, but as it stands, what we've seen is a huge shift in the types of different pricing models. So our base models are pay per use or pay monthly, but what we're seeing is demand for different types of pricing models to meet different kind of industries and requirements. I mean, James, you've been involved in a few here, haven't you?
Yeah, for sure. I think it is a challenge. It's hard to perhaps even get people completely on the page to understand what Mobiess offers, let alone the rest of the industry. And like Karl says, you can look at per user pricing. It's obviously a very common one. People think people understand that generally, but moving into per user, per device, where does a user differ from a device, and how does that usage just track? Is it groups of use? Is it tiered usage? Is it even looking at transactional or things you're generating from the software and paying on that? We've seen a few examples of paying per report, for example, per certificate. Like, what is it you're generating? And I think trying to understand both what we can offer as a provider and what any provider can really offer, what works for them so it's sustainable, because the worst thing is obviously to offer a pricing solution that just kind of cripples your business. No, absolutely, but for the clients especially, understanding what that journey looks like, from what are we trying to achieve, what is achievable, and just making sure we don't immediately trip up by over-egging it, and paying massively for licensing that is wasted, or under-egging it and significantly getting hit because they think, oh, okay, I'll pay, say, per report, and then they end up generating 5,000 reports a day. Obviously becomes a bit of a challenge. So
I mean,
it's always hard because it's always hard because
carry on, Karl.
As soon as you start to talk to a customer about their business and where they derive benefit from the mobile solution, it's really easy to try to change your pricing to meet their individual requirements, but you can't do that with every customer. So it becomes awfully difficult to provide lots of options on the pricing. So from a business, we settled on the per device. It's a really low cost, but I think there are different pricing models as well in terms of levels of pricing. Some people charge £100-200 a month a user. So when you're charging that kind of pricing, then you want more flexibility and easier pricing options. I think one of the other challenges we're in the world now is security. One of the things we've actually been working on over the last 2 or 3 years is lots of government contracts. Ones where you've got on-premise. So we're being asked to provide software that's been installed in a client's offices and client's data centers, but they still want pay-as-you-go because they're still unsure, because they've got a very fluid and dynamic usage of the software. So we've got about 4 or 5 large-scale solutions now, these hybrid SaaS. So the customer gets the benefit of looking after it themselves in terms of the infrastructure. So they've kind of got this level of security that they're happy that it's within their kind of data center. But they still get the benefit if during the summer they've got huge amounts of their staff off. Didn't do us too well during COVID, mind you, the SaaS-based pricing model. So I think one of your questions was, is there a disadvantage to SaaS? Yes, COVID.
Well, yeah, I suppose that was, and it was almost kind of alluding to what you've just mentioned, that fact that actually a lot of the time SaaS does mean that kind of hosted on the cloud, off-premises type model. But obviously, as you're saying, it can be more subtle than that, that actually it can be a mix, and it doesn't always necessarily mean that it is hosted on the cloud, that there can be these kind of on-premises versions. I suppose when you've highlighted security as an issue, because obviously some people are, depending on the context of their business, they're going to have even higher levels of concern around security and access. And I suppose that is part of that kind of vendor scorecard, where you're going to say to a vendor, look, well, I have these concerns either about the business model, as you were saying, James, in terms of the pricing, how does it work given the volumes, but also that balance of, if it is going to be hosted off premise, how does that work in terms of, where's the data stored from a jurisdictional perspective, sometimes those kind of issues. Now, I guess that's another area where perhaps software as a service sounds very attractive, but there are some things that our members should be thinking about, shouldn't they?
Absolutely. I think every customer we have is different, and I think you can sectorize it really in terms of size as well. Some of the small kind of solutions we offer, they're very small numbers. There might be 5s or 10s. So the level of justification and security questioning that we actually get is very lightweight compared to a large-scale solution where you're integrating with one of the major industry TFM players. So, but you've got to be able to play across all those different sectors with the same product, delivering the same level of service.
So, I mean, if you think of a few examples, I mean, there are obviously, hopefully, efficiency and environmental benefits, but what are those benefits? When you talk to customers, what are the things you can really highlight that actually do really differentiate what your platform does from what's gone before, to be honest, in terms of the way that people have been working prior to this?
I think it's interesting because also if you go back to where we came from, when we first set Mobiess up, one of our key principles was to treat data as a first-class citizen, and I think it's really important, because I think one of the nuances of SaaS really is you do lose a little bit of control. So I think if you can imagine the world we come from, which is a traditional kind of CAFM, help desk, plan maintenance, asset management system being installed on your servers. From a reporting point of view, you've got raw access to all that data, and now suddenly it's protected in the cloud, and someone's put this overlay of additional security over it that you can't get to it. So part of our platforms, we've always concentrated on making sure that data is available, even if it's in its most simplest Excel download format and customers can configure it. But we've got lots of options for making sure that data is available. And I think we didn't set up this business to produce pretty PDFs and documents. We set the business up to collect information and data. Knowledge, and I think that's what one of the change in the last 4 or 5 years has been, and it's not been a subtle change, it's been a huge change in demand. So we've had to change with it and provide additional services for data. So and it also comes down to this kind of concerns about, where does my data reside? I think in those early days, it's a lot better now, if I'm honest, Andrew, but in the early days there was this kind of nervousness about SaaS, because it's all up in the cloud, but where is it in the cloud? Not just what country is it in, but I actually physically don't have it. It's not tangible. I can't put it in my hands and grab it, and I think that's one of the things providers like us have to do, is to provide tools to make sure that data delivery is real time, and it's what we do. We provide tools that if you have 100 areas into our data center, it could be on your network within a minute. And that provides a lot of confidence, because I think when you talk about SaaS as well, I mean, we're short-term contract SaaS. People are nervous that you could go out of business tomorrow because they've got no visibility of who you are. They know whether their own company's stable, but they don't know who you are. They don't know whether you're doing well or not. So that kind of enabling them to have their data in real time all the time as well is really, really important, even for the small people, even for the small organizations, with 5-man surveying teams. Having that data on their network is really, really important. And we are seeing a change as well in the technical ability of some of those small surveying practices, the way they consume data. It's still one of the difficulties in the industry, though.
I would add, just quickly to that, Karl?
Yeah, James, do come in.
Just quickly, I think there's, going back a few years now, but I think there is a very valid and a very interesting discussion around transparency of SaaS providers, access both, to client data, to personal data, to use the buzzword perhaps of GDPR, not to undersell or oversell GDPR, which obviously affected various industries and various types of business in different ways. But the principles of that were no bad thing for me, and I spent a little bit of time when that became an issue that we had to deal with, trying to understand that, and attending some sessions with various people, and just the lack of understanding as to what was required and also expected of various providers. What will you keep on me? How long will you keep it about me? Like, how quickly will I be able to access data from you if I challenge you on it? So I think just to echo what Karl says, I think that there's no downside to thinking about the ideas of transparency and that reliance on a SaaS provider, and really pushing them to prove and be confident in what they're going to provide, because it's very easy to promise a lot and perhaps not deliver it. And the downside, of course, is really relying on SaaS means that any sort of system outage or any lack of access to those systems can be critical, absolutely critical, and it can have huge impacts in a very short amount of time. So it's something to be very mindful of.
I feel that there's an inevitable degree of nervousness, because you are effectively delegating some pretty mission critical, to use the phrase, processes to an outside supplier, and you need that to be available, and you need to know that you can, in extremis, get your data out. Arguably, I mean, ultimately, if you wanted to move supply, you don't want to be trapped in that walled garden where you can't move from one supplier to the next, arguably, in that sort of extreme situation. So
one flip side to that, sorry, Andrew, just on that, just to close on that. So it was to sort of think that there is a flip side, which is that you should expect, a good turnaround and good quality from a SaaS provider, and it shouldn't be something you kind of sort of forego. But as Karl mentioned at the start, the way we try to approach, our clients, the way we support them is kind of a pay as you go. It's a monthly. If you use it, great. If you don't use it, then we'll obviously not bill people for products that they don't use, and that means that they can also potentially swap people in and out quite quickly. So if your SaaS provider doesn't live up to the standards that you either set for them or expectations in terms of data access, if you simply can't provide it and you're not happy with it, then that's the risk for us as well. And it's always a thing that we have to be very, very keen in making sure we're doing the things we say we will do, and to a standard at which we will say we will do them, because the downside to us, of course, and the risk is we will say, okay, it's a 30-day service, and if we fail on any part of it, you're well within your rights to say thanks, Mobiess, but move aside. So that's always
so I suppose it does focus your mind on service, because you're as good as your last month, really, aren't you?
Absolutely.
for many people. So I mean, on that theme of actually almost the kind of back to the real world of how people are using this, can you bring it alive in terms of your platform, in terms of some of the kind of FM and asset managers, and what are they actually using it for? Sounds like a dim question, but just bringing it alive in terms of the kind of use cases and how they're actually applying it in the real world.
No, that's easy. I mean, it's interesting because I kind of got like the long story and the new story. Going back to our roots, we ended up over the first 2 or 3 years with 3 or 4 kind of core products, and they are our service management side. So it's that classic man in a van, engineer, fix things, spanner, time recording, point of work risk assessments, those kind of things. So good, strong service management. And what's interesting on that one is most organizations who run CAFM and IWMS systems don't realize they have a choice. So where we sit in, because our actual CAFM, our mobile service management module, is not aligned to any one CAFM system. So we serve many. So we take bits of each of those systems, and ours it's a very flexible model. So we can swap out existing CAFM vendors' own mobile solutions.
All right.
And not many people realize you do that. So I won't talk about some of our customers, but most of our customers use one of the top 4 or 5 CAFM systems, but they don't use their mobile solutions. They use us on the service management side. Whereas one of the other large products we have is our compliance and auditing tool set. So it's an e-form. So it's that classic, I can design my own forms and data collection with intelligence and get the data out. So it's used by a lot of the TFMs for compliance for things like gas certification, all sorts, health and safety surveys, auditing. So that's kind of our second core product. But the one that's really gone mad over the last 3 or 4 years is the asset collection and validation. It's just, don't know where it's come from. I mean, probably about 7, it's just really odd. About 7 years ago, we developed a system with a partner, and it was a kind of simple asset collection tool, and it's just blown up into one of the largest sort of standalone asset collection tools on the market at the moment. I mean, we're working with government sector. Most of the, I'd say, out of the top 10 TFM companies, we've probably got 7 or 8 of them. Yeah. And I think it's because they're very independent. So it's irrelevant what CAFM system they're putting assets to go in, because most of those kind of large maintenance and asset management companies have to serve multiple masters. They'll have their own CAFM system like Maximo at the back end, but ultimately they'll pick up another contract that they've got a link with Plan On, or they've got a link with, Concept or someone. So all of them have got their own kind of prerequisites and nuances, but having an asset collection system allows them to drive standards in the middle like ours is where it's really been. I mean, I would say probably in the last 2 years alone, we've probably had over 4 million assets collected on our platform. It's just gone crazy, it really has. And so, but all of those products are in use by a whole range of those large kind of asset maintenance companies within the UK, in conjunction with many different CAFM systems. But equally, some of them are standalone as well. Now, our applications are, we always feel they're kind of like a collection of our ideas, but also industry best practice. So we're not sort of that intelligent. We make everything up ourselves. We plagiarize the industry. That's why I've been in the software industry for so long, because I'm probably the best plagiarizer there is. But what we did do was, when we had that first slowdown during COVID, we thought, how can we kind of benefit ourselves a bit more? So what we did, we took what we called a micro app strategy. So we started to pull together little bits of things that we were working with all our customers together and package them up into these kind of little nuggets and little applications of best practice. So out of COVID, we ended up with about 15 of these little apps that we've been marketing. And what that's done, that's changed the way it's changed our client base. So over the last kind of year, our client base has moved down to a lot smaller 5-10 user systems, 3 user systems. So whereas we've got some systems with 500 mobile users on, and some of these large maintenance companies, but we've now got a much more diverse client base out there, and they're all doing the same thing, Andrew. They're not doing anything different. They're all doing fire risk assessments. They're all doing Legionella. They're all doing exactly the same things, but a lot of them are 2 or 3 levels down in that supply chain. Yeah, but they're still working for the same people at the top, but they're working a little bit further down the supply chain. So, but now what we're doing is we're bringing it at a much lower cost to them and helping them to actually deliver the same quality and level of service, and not just a pretty PDF. It's data, and that's the most important thing. So,
I suppose that was something I wanted to pick up on, because I mean, it's a subject I've talked about a lot at RICS, in terms of almost being slightly not rude about the sector, but the fact that it's still very much document driven, that so much information on the built environment is effectively a document. Even if it's digital, it's only because it's probably a PDF of a Word document, or a scan of something. And I think one of the huge opportunities, but also the huge risks, is if we don't get the industry to make that journey from sort of just having everything as a certificate to actually having the data. I mean, I don't know, something as simple as a gas safe certificate. It's always a document. It's not really a structured record that says, well, which property is it? When was it issued? When does it run out? Who did it? You end up with a situation where you can't really analyze data, because you're just trying to analyze documents. And I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on that, and what you've been doing to try and kind of support that journey to try and get everybody to think about structured data and be able to analyze. And given the kind of volumes of transactions your customers are doing, they must want to have analytics, not just look at bits of paper.
Do you mind, Karl,
It's really interesting, yeah. Go on.
I think
just to lead Karl into this, because I know he can speak much more eloquently about this than I can, but I would say that is not a unique problem as well, even in the year 2021, fast approaching 2022, and we're still debating that and the approach to that. And I think the importance of, you can call it what you like, but I guess the idea of a true mobile strategy and how that factors into what your organization is trying to achieve, much more than just, oh great, my engineer X has done this today, and how do I spit that out into a pretty document, like you say. But actually, what does that mean in terms of who's looking at that data, who's analyzing it, who's trying to push it where, and what can that tell you for your organization? And getting people on board to look at that strategy can be a challenge. And I think Karl would agree. Even now, you can get the right people involved in a conversation, but to get everyone on board with it and to think of it much more than just mobility tends to be a bit of a tick box exercise, I think, for some areas where you can look at the functionality of a product that you have, a CAFM system, CMMS, and just say, okay, this supports mobile, great. So we'll assume that it does everything we want. But when you start to dig into what you get out of that, and also not to double back to the ideas of what the SaaS provider can give you also, but actually whether you have access to data is a big part of this, or you just get a PDF out of it, because you can't do a lot with a PDF unless you have someone sitting there, perhaps manually entering some of the values, and then that becomes a chore unto itself, and you start to immediately lose everyone's interest in the process. But yeah, that is a challenge for us. But strategy, like I say, is the idea of get people on board, understand, truly put into place, parts of that process that will benefit different areas of the business. It's not that we again, not to maybe use this as a catch-all, but it's not an IT-driven process. This is what we always say, that it obviously is an IT angle on this, and it's important for IT to be involved, but certainly not steered by IT, because so many other parts of a business need to understand, just what they're trying to achieve and who needs to benefit from the data, and that takes wide involvement. Many stakeholders, an awful lot of approval, sometimes it's sign-offs, but it's an important process. So,
Karl, what are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. It's a really interesting thing though, because it's much more evident when people take their first steps into mobile. So many of the customers we've worked with over the last few years, it's their first kind of large-scale mobile deployments, and they come from a background where they've got a CAFM system exactly the same, or they've got this huge set of documentation. So for them, their output is, I've got to get from A to B with the same journey. I've still got to achieve B, and they forget the bit that's in the middle. So often we get presented with 30 PDFs and say, this is what we need to do, without there being an opportunity to sort of kind of engage them and go, well, what is it you're trying to achieve? Because the PDF's easy, but what is it you're trying to achieve? And we was on a recent journey with a client, and what we did was they went through their first phase where great, they ended up with all the and everything else, and what that did just kind of met their kind of first level set of requirements. The second stage was when was designing it with them, we were quite smart. We put together sufficient kind of collective asset information across all of their forms that it now actually gave them half of their actual asset registers to a particular consistent standard. So that was that. The next step was all of those forms have remedial actions on them. So now they have a collective set of remedials that come out into their CAFM system in real time. So after everything, so it was taking them on a journey. I think the whole kind of proposal of doing that in one big project was too much for them. I think that first step, but it is about that kind of ensuring they understand what they're collecting has value, and it is data, and it's not a PDF. In many instances, the PDF is for their client. It's kind of, it's a bit like the old service sheet, the 3-part service sheet. One to them, one to you, one on the in a shelf, and it was kind of, and I think it's kind of the mentality is still there, it hasn't changed. I mean, and people love it. They love the pretty PDF, but they are coming around to the fact that the PDF is just based upon data. And I've always liked it. I used to really be into my dashboard years ago, and I read a few books on it, and there was this one line in it and said, if when you look at a dashboard, there's nothing actionable on it, it's not a dashboard. You shouldn't be looking at it. And it's true. So when you've got if you collect this data and you don't action anything from the data, is it really worth collecting? And then, and I know there's a compliance point of view, but with much of it, there's value in it. You should be analysing. You should be in comparative reporting. You can't do that as a PDF, but you can certainly do it with data. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is making sure our clients understand that what we give them is data and knowledge, you know, and that's the thing that's going to help them win the contract next time round, be able to demonstrate their reporting. And it's really important because we've got I'll talk loosely, but we've got a client, and very self-delivery capable, great tech team, didn't want us involved. So we gave them a piece of our software that gave them the data, and they've got about 30 dashboards in Power BI written over it. They run their whole business from their mobile teams off of it, and we don't get involved. But they actually understood data, and that was the most important thing. So their starting point was way above many other organizations, because they knew what they wanted from a data point of view to drive their business processes, and for their, I love the word, betterment. They were continually looking at improvement, and for them, they had a very good starting point. And part of our job is try to bring some of our customers who are on that journey first time round up to that level as quickly as possible, you know. But you can't do it all in. I think the most important thing is not to try to achieve it all in your first deployment.
Yeah, so as that sort of
for a fall.
Yeah, that kind of IT phrase of not trying to boil the ocean, you know, and it's another cliche to talk about journey, but it is a journey, isn't it? And I think it's interesting that it's not so much the technology as just changing people's mindsets and approach to things, and it is this almost just reversing this direction of people focusing on PDFs, where a PDF is simply an output of some data that you've collected that you want to present it in a certain way for a certain stakeholder who wants a certificate. But actually the key is to record the data, and then you can produce your PDF and you can produce other outputs, rather than just always focusing on the PDF being almost the beginning of the process, rather than actually it's just one potential output that a certain stakeholder needs. But I suppose, you know, talking about barriers to this, I think, as you were saying, James, you know, sometimes organizations do take time to change, and the barriers are to some extent that sort of the mentality, if I can use that phrase, and the classic, well, we've always done it that way, and not realizing that it opens up so many other potential sort of opportunities once you've got that data in a form that you can analyze it. And it's arguably very easy now with things like Power BI, isn't it? You know, the tools are out there. If you've just got some structured data, you suddenly, particularly in this kind of FM asset management world where you're looking for trends, you're looking for you know, quite quantitative data to help you manage assets better, and indeed help you manage your workforce better.
It's really interesting. I mean, one of the large projects, we were asked to come in and add value to the actual project, and part of our platform, we have an auditing element. So if anyone changes an asset, every change to the asset is audited through its life cycle. So the normal process is you collect an asset, you quality assurance an asset. So the quality assurance obviously means you spot mistakes, you make the updates. So we provide a league table on the engineers and who's the worst engineer in terms of the number of
naughty list.
But this is what data does. It provides you with knowledge and intelligence to make decisions. So should I keep surveyors for longer for the next project or not? You know, and this is what, and I think people like Mobiess are really well placed to help them do that. But they also want the data themselves. They don't want that level of to be beholden to the likes of a company to do all of their data for them. And I think I've seen a big change in industry to this a demand for more consumption, but self-consumption, rather than just paying a consultancy team in another company to write the reports and do everything for them. So I've seen a great demand in that, especially in the smaller companies as well, as those skills, as they upskill in those smaller surveying practices, as they upskill, they're now becoming familiar. Like you say, you can get a little cheap version of Power BI and run it off of Excel in your network, and you can still present the same quality outputs as the big companies. So it's extremely good for them.
No, and you know, we're very mindful on this program that, you know, the majority of our ICS members are working in those smaller practices, those smaller firms, and you know, it's really key that technology does, you know, is democratized. It's available for every level, and you know, I think a combination of SaaS and these other tools that you can integrate with them really are a key part of that, together with, as you say, this kind of trickle down of almost education, this awareness that actually we've been working on these PDFs for so long, but you know, buried away in those PDFs is the raw data that gives us so many other opportunities. Well, it's been tremendous to talk today, and you know, I look forward to our next session. But you know, this has been very informative, and thanks ever so much for your time, and I look forward to the next opportunity to have a chat like this. Thanks, James. Thanks,
Thank you.
Karl. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Great to talk.
Pleasure.